Sorry, guys, you just have to agree to that recording thing before your sound comes back. You just have to agree, and then you'll come back on. Danford, you are muted. Yeah, okay, that's why you're back. Danford, you're muted. Ah, you're back. All right, go ahead.
Oh, nice.
Dan, are you good, or do you want me to take over?
Roshan, we are hosting Roshan Dadu from the South African Boycott, Divestment and Sanction Coalition, who will give a seminar titled "The Palestinian Call for International Solidarity Through Boycotts, Divestments and Sanctions." South Africans know BDS works. Now we must escalate. We're happy to have you at the CCS, Roshan, and we are looking forward to learn more about your advocacy and campaigns, what you've achieved, your challenges. To introduce Roshan to the audience, Roshan Dadu is the coordinator of the South African BDS coalition. She has worked for a migrant rights NGO and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, where she served in the Middle East section on the Israel-Palestine desk as the political counselor at the South African Embassy in Algiers. Roshan, I'll give you 30 to 40 minutes to tell us more about your work at BDS, and then after that you will engage with the audience through a question and answer session. Thank you so much for making time to come and present your work at the Center for Civil Society. I thank you.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me. I think it's a brilliant series, campaigns you need to know about. And I definitely think the Palestinian boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign is one that everyone needs to know about. So I don't want to start with sort of history of Palestine or what is happening there now, but to say, in the words of Colombian President Gustavo Petro, if Palestine dies, humanity dies. And he has repeatedly elevated the Palestinian struggle to the forefront of international politics, treating the situation in Gaza not just as a regional conflict, but as a universal symbol of resistance against tyranny and a warning for the future of the global South. And I think that sort of sums up why, even though we can see the US Zionist forces of imperialism creating havoc all over the world, from Venezuela to Cuba to Iran, to even threatening about Greenland, and really just having seemingly to have no boundaries. If we focus on Palestine, it is central to the whole US imperialist project. And so focusing on our solidarity with the people of Palestine, focusing our work to ensure that we are acting, not just speaking in solidarity, is, I would agree with Gustavo Petro, central to us fighting against tyranny and for the future of us all. So just to move on to what is the BDS campaign? The Palestinian-led BDS movement, boycott, divestment and sanctions movement, was formed in 2005 by 170 Palestinian unions, refugee networks, women's organizations, professional associations, popular resistance committees, other Palestinian civil society bodies. And it was consciously modeled on our call that we made on the international community during our liberation struggle, for exactly that, to isolate the system of apartheid, to isolate the South African apartheid regime, and to hold it to account. And so that's why I feel in South Africa, we know that this strategy works. We know that it takes long, it's not a quick fix, but we know that if you start raising up the issue, if you get people taking actions all around the world, eventually they put pressure on their own governments. And that's what happened in our case, where governments started take measures because of popular pressure in their countries to impose various sanctions, to impose embargoes, and that's what we're looking at right now. And I think in the same as our struggle, when there's an upswing in the struggle, solidarity movement happened in our struggle in '76 and then in the early '80s. And I think that the genocide in Gaza, or the resistance that led to the genocide in Gaza, has also had that effect where we can see millions of people, you know, in countries like Australia and the UK, where even a year before, it would have been unthinkable that that number of people would have come out for to show support for Palestine. That we've reached that tipping point, and that's why now I think we need to consolidate and escalate our campaigns. So the importance of saying that it is Palestinian led, I think it's something that we need to keep reminding people. We're not just acting on what we think Palestinian people want or need from us. We're actually carrying out what the Palestinian people, in a vast majority, they made sure to get a huge consensus at the time of launching the call, what the Palestinian people are asking of us. So I think it's, you know, it's similar to our struggle. We made that point repeatedly, that it's South Africans in struggle who are asking for the international community to divest, to boycott products from the apartheid regime, and to push their governments to impose sanctions. And also, I think it's worth remembering that the campaign started in 2005. And so the call is not just about stopping the genocide. We know that there's not been a real ceasefire in Gaza. We can see now that Israel is illegally actually occupying southern Lebanon after bombing it and ethnically cleansing the people from southern Lebanon. We can see in the West Bank as well that the kind of ethnic cleansing, that the settler pogroms, the arrest, detentions, the torture is all escalating. But the call is not just for a ceasefire or an end to one immediate atrocity. The call that has been made in 2005 is until Israel ends its occupation and colonization of all Palestinian lands, the dismantling of the apartheid wall, recognizing the fundamental rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and most importantly, respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. So that basically means the dismantlement of the Zionist apartheid regime between the river and the sea. And it's couched in the language of international law. But, you know, basically, it's an ongoing struggle. And then I think the other important thing is the values that the Palestinian BDS movement have articulated. So they use the UN definition of racial discrimination and state that the BDS movement does not tolerate any act or discourse that adopts or promotes, among others, anti-Black racism, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, sexism, xenophobia, or homophobia. And I think that's another important thing to bring out, because the Palestinian call is related to then condemning apartheid, genocide, slavery, colonial exploitation, and ethnic cleansing, which are crimes against humanity founded on racism and racial supremacy, and calling for the rights of all victims, including descendants, to full reparation. So they're talking not only about the aspirations for the Palestinian people, but they say quite explicitly, we equally condemn and stand in solidarity with the victims of other human rights violations, including human trafficking, worker exploitation, sexual exploitation. We stand in solidarity with people of African descent, indigenous people, landless people, refugees and migrants, people exploited and oppressed for the economic advancement of a few, and those discriminated against and persecuted for their beliefs or identity, including caste. We stand with their struggles for racial, economic, gender, environmental, and social justice. So I think, you know, it's a very progressive call that was made. in 2005 that recognized Palestine is central, and the campaigning in order to dismantle the Zionist apartheid and now genocidal regime is central to all of us. And we have also had expressions of solidarity at times, for instance, when the Stilfontein mine workers were massacred, literally in artisanal mine workers in the mines in Stilfontein. The Palestinian Trade Union, New Trade Union Federation sent messages of solidarity to the community here and to the mine workers that were suffering in the mines at that time. So I think it's, you know, it's a very progressive and a two-way kind of conception of solidarity. But moving on, so BDS, boycotts. So boycotts are actions to withdraw support from Israel's apartheid regime, from complicit Israeli sporting, cultural and academic institutions, and all Israeli and international companies engaged in violations of Palestinian human rights. So I think it's safe to say that nearly every Israeli company is engaged in violations of Palestinian human rights. And then, of course, there are some international companies that are targeted for their particular role in complicity with the Zionist state. So consumer boycotts, and I think this is something that's often not understood. The BDS calls for targeted boycotts. Globally, of course, it makes more impact if everyone around the world is targeting the same companies, and now most companies are global, and defining the most complicit companies. So whilst nowadays, especially, there's such a web of interrelationship between companies that own products, that you could say we need to boycott absolutely everything. Whilst, yes, indeed, you know, everyone, I think, should be trying to shop ethically and know who owns what and where products come from. The idea of campaigning is to target a few that are most complicit. So it's both more likely to be winnable, especially if it's a global mobilization, but also consumer boycotts as campaigns are educative. So I'm sure Shania remembers in London that we used to stand outside shops every Saturday, like just a few people in different places around the country, with leaflets telling people why they should boycott South African products. So it's and then you get talking to people about apartheid, and in this case, of course, about Palestine, that you wouldn't normally go in a shop on a Saturday and walk up to a random stranger and start talking about Palestine. So it also, I think, the consumer boycotts targeted in that way have an educative value and a mobilizing value as well. Then under boycotts, there's also the academic boycott, which in fact was a call made the year before the BDS call was made by the Palestinian PACB, Palestinian Academic and Cultural Boycott Against Israel campaign. And in South Africa, there are now 5 institutions that have passed boycott resolutions. And the idea being, of course, that cutting all ties with Israel, all academic ties and institutional ties, and also, I think now, especially looking at procurement, and so the targeted consumer boycott campaigns like the boycott against HP is one that is often taken up by academics because HP printers are often on the procurement lists, is another area of focus on within the sort of broader academic boycott campaign. But as we know in South Africa, well, I think, you know, it's great that there are 5 that have taken boycott resolutions. We're now looking, in fact, I was in a discussion with academics from NMU earlier, because they're now looking at how they can insist on the university implementing the boycott and what that would mean. But there's also, of course, the former white universities in the main that have been very resistant, have fought back against boycott resolutions when academics have come together and put these resolutions to Senate, such as at UJ and WITS. At UCT, the Zionist academic took a court case against all the academics who had voted for a resolution, an academic boycott resolution. So there's still a lot of work to be done here, I think, around academic boycotts. The other areas of boycott, cultural boycotts. Again, I think there's been sporadic calls for the cultural boycott here, and that's one of the areas that we want to try to bring together more. And I think that maybe the recent catastrophe of Gabrielle Goliath, the artist who'd been selected to present her work in the Venice Biennale as the South African pavilion, when Minister Gayton McKenzie cancelled her. And then she actually lost the first court case she took, but she's determined to fight back. And it was because her work, which is to do with memory and genocide, and those sort of subjects around Namibia and South Africa and other places, also included the genocide in Gaza. So I think maybe that is also a way in which we can support her, because she is continuing to fight back, but also a way perhaps of galvanizing support for a cultural boycott, because particularly in Cape Town, there are lots of these Israeli things like DJs and kind of music events that suddenly they realize that there's an Israeli DJ playing in some festival there, and there's protest actions and so on. But putting pressure so that institutions don't feel able to invite Israeli cultural workers to perform here. The sports boycott is another area. This year, again, I think there will be quite a big presence at well, in fact, you probably know more because you're there, at the Comrades Marathon. I think last year, Comrades together, and it was quite effective. We also saw that there were some runners running under the Israeli flag, and that became a sort of a focus of bringing attention and trying to insist on the cancellation of their participation. But again, it's a long struggle to get to the point where organizations like the Comrades Marathon or other sporting codes will take a stand, unfortunately, even as South Africans. So moving on to sanctions. So sanctions really are only things that states can implement, but states will never implement them unless there's pressure put. And so although there have been resolutions that get vetoed all the time within the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly voted on a resolution following the advisory opinion of the ICJ on the illegality of the occupation that did include calling on state parties to implement sanctions. And additionally, or just prior to that, the case that South Africa took at the ICJ against Israel under the Genocide Convention, the provisional measures that the court ruled on meant that countries should also, in line with the ruling of plausible genocide, needed to ensure that they were doing everything they could to prevent and to punish the country that is plausibly committing genocide. So the kind of international legal framework has grown very rapidly since the genocide. And I think now it's perfectly possible, and it is possible actually, countries are beginning to take actions, even European countries like Spain, even countries are being pushed hard to stop a trade agreement. The EU as well, there's been a big push from certain countries to cancel the new trade agreement with Israel. And even in the UK, they banned some tiny bits of the fighter planes that are manufactured in Britain. It's not nearly enough, but I think it's, Even that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. But in South Africa, unfortunately, we have not taken any of these kind of actions. So we still technically have diplomatic relations with Israel, although very much reduced because we downgraded our embassy in Tel Aviv. And then there was expulsion of the charge d'affaires of the Israeli embassy here. So it's very downgraded, but we still haven't actually acted to close the embassy, even though Parliament voted in favor of doing so, I think almost 2 years ago now. We still trade with Israel. There's no restrictions on trading. And as I mentioned, with boycotts, there's no policy of any department around sport, cultural, or procurement boycotts. So in terms of sanctions, we started looking a couple of years ago to see how we could put pressure on the government to implement some kind of trade embargoes. Our largest export to Israel is coal. So we looked at how we could raise up this issue, because coal literally fuels the genocide, literally fuels the Israeli electricity grid, which fuels everything, the military industrial complex, the Elbit weapons manufacturing, the illegal settlements, the IOF and the weaponry that's used. And it's a very energy intensive wars that they're fighting, especially now with the drones and the surveillance and the systems where they use AI to target people and those things that are really energy intensive. So we started trying to campaign and understand ourselves and do research to see exactly how our coal was getting to Israel. And, obviously raising it up as fueling the genocide. So even though we've taken Israel to the ICJ, even though that arising from that, South Africa and Colombia co-chairs rather, of the Hague group of countries, which is really global South countries, although now at the last meeting, other countries were also, did also participate, specifically that have come together in order to implement what the ICJ rulings have said and what the UN General Assembly has said to impose sanctions, particularly weapons, military embargo and energy embargo. So there is a global BDS campaign around the energy embargo, and Colombia did impose a coal embargo and stopped selling coal when they found there was still coal going from Colombia. They even went as far as doubled down on it and made sure that they changed the decree or added to the presidential decree, which is how they had brought about this embargo, to ensure that not a single lump of Colombian coal was reaching Israel. As part of this campaign, we started looking at ship tracking. So we've learned an awful lot about international trade patterns and routes, and now we have a way of tracking ships where you can see when ships are coming into the Richards Bay coal terminal, loading with coal, and then flagging their destination as Israel. There have been some that are sort of sanction busting where they flag to Gibraltar and then afterwards turn off their transponder and then turn it on again when they're in the Israeli ports. But a lot of them are still coming and flagging themselves as heading to Israel, and you can track them and see where they are as they go around the west coast now of our continent, because of the solidarity actions of the Houthis in Yemen that stopped ships from going directly up the east coast of our continent to reach the Mediterranean. So from the ship tracking, we've been able to see exactly how much coal is going. There are 2 ships now, I think, that are docked or about to dock in Richards Bay that have previously done exactly the same route from Singapore to Richards Bay Coal Terminal to Israel. And so we are pretty sure that they are also going to be heading the same way with our coal. And shockingly, this has increased, partly because of Colombia's ban. So at the beginning of the genocide, South African coal accounted for 11% of the coal Israel imported. And now we account for 88% of the coal Israel is importing. And the electricity generated by coal is around 25% over the last few years. So we would actually have a really big impact if we stopped our coal going to Israel, on Israel, but it wouldn't have a bad effect here because it's a very small amount, less than 3% of the coal we export and less than 1% of the coal we mine. And because there are many, many other countries from Mozambique, Mauritius, Vietnam, China, Japan, even the Netherlands import coal from South Africa, there would definitely be that small amount would be taken up by other markets. So, you know, the argument that is often put in against BDS is that it has a negative effect on our economy, that it would mean job losses. But I think when you look into it, that simply isn't the case. And it would have a direct and meaningful impact against the Zionist state of Israel. So that's one of the campaigns that we're continuing to work on. We have been trying to meet with the government departments, the relevant ones, for over a year and a half. They have refused to even respond to most of our letters. We then got a legal group together. So we started writing legal letters to them, giving them deadlines to respond, and they still didn't respond, particularly targeting the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, because the minister of that department has the authority under current legislation to regulate export permits and do due diligence to see where exports are going and to take action against, in this case, against coal going to Israel. Finally, after all of these increasingly legal letters, we did get a meeting with the minister just a couple of weeks ago, and we asked him, you know, are you going to make the decision? You have the power. We had, over the last 6 months, compiled a really detailed and referenced report called Fueling Genocide, an analysis of South Africa's coal exports to Israel, which is on our website, outlining exactly the domestic law, the international law, and the mechanism by which the minister has this authority without reference to any changes of law, any other bodies of government. He said he's not able to make that decision. So now in the legal side, we're looking at taking, you know, what further action we can take to compel him to make such a decision. At the same time, we've also been targeting the companies, the private companies that are selling coal. One of the largest companies selling coal is Glencore, and it was Glencore also in Colombia that was selling coal to Israel. And there was also a shipment of Glencore coal from Australia to Israel. So we've been protesting at Glencore. We're going to be part of the global day of action against Glencore on the 28th of May. There'll be actions from Peru, Colombia, European countries at the Glencore global headquarters in Switzerland, where the AGM takes place, and in South Africa at the Glencore headquarters in Johannesburg. And we're partnering with climate justice activists and organizations and mining affected communities, such as the National Association of Artisanal Mine Workers and Makua, Mining Affected Communities United in Action, and collectively raising up the demands for stopping the coal sales to Israel, but also the issues around the devastation that Glencore causes around the world to communities, indigenous people, to the land, and the environmental, also the environmental damage they do. And then I think Lubna is here on this weekend, tomorrow, in fact, was going to be a group of us from Joburg and another group from Durban converging in Richards Bay, where we're going to have a town hall rally tomorrow evening, and then also a protest march the following day, and workshops and so on. And we're hoping to meet with some of the Port Trade Union shop stewards from Satawu and the other union, Untu, that are the, I think now between them, the main two unions in the port. We have been trying to work with the trade union movement in general, and we got a very good resolution calling on unions to take action specifically supporting the coal embargo from the last COSATU Central Committee. But again, it's another area where we have to still do a lot of work to get real action realized. I think I'll stop there, if that's okay. And then, you know, take questions. I think, I hope that I've given at least an overview of BDS as a strategy devised by the Palestinian people and being enacted globally. And I think those two factors mean, as we know from our struggles in our struggle in South Africa, it worked. It did work. We did ultimately manage to impose sanctions against apartheid South Africa and put that pressure in support of the resistance on the ground, in support of our liberation movements that eventually did bring down the apartheid regime. And although we maybe didn't bring down the underpinning settler colonial and racial capitalist underpinnings of the apartheid regime, we're engaged in that struggle now, and our struggles are connected in that sense with the Palestinian struggle, because if we allow the Palestinian people to be literally obliterated, we know that it's not going to end there. Thanks.